He was voted Variety Entertainer of the Year in the Excellence in the Arts Awards. He is the voice of logic and reason. Now, from the entertainment capital of the world, Doug Basham.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining me again and welcome again to the show. My name is Doug Basham. That's also my website, DougBasham.com. How you get a hold of me as well, Doug at DougBasham.com. Now, for those who don't know, let me give you my resume. I am a former singer and keyboardist, drummer, magician, and for the past several years, the only liberal progressive talk radio host here in Las Vegas. Therefore, when you get to my website, guess what you're going to find? If you said literally hours of my radio show dating all the way back to 2017, you're right. And you're a whole lot smarter than you look. Also on my website, you'll find the links to both my Facebook and Twitter pages, on both of which I am exceedingly active. You'll also see a link to my very new YouTube channel, and the starting point for all that soul sanitizing goodness is DougBasham.com. And speaking of my YouTube channel, I do want to thank all you Trump supporters for rushing over there and subscribing to it. I'm kidding. From all available evidence, that hasn't happened. I'd like to begin with our troll of the week. Does anybody think it was just a coincidence that on the week of former legitimate President Barack Obama's birthday, current legitimate President Biden wore a tan suit? Well done, Mr. President. Secondly, finally, it was actually and genuinely Infrastructure Week. Anybody remember the number of times Donald Trump told us it was Infrastructure Week? That, along with Biden's infrastructure success, inspired Midas Touch to come up with this.
Secretary Chow kicked off Infrastructure Week with an event with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce this morning.
Infrastructure Week continues.
We're actually calling it Infrastructure Week in this administration, and today I have the honor to kick off our very first summit.
We call it Infrastructure Week.
My administration is working every day to deliver the world-class infrastructure that our people deserve and, frankly, that our country deserves. We are here today to discuss the urgent need to rebuild and restore America's depleted infrastructure. We're going to get this infrastructure going.
Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th President of the United States.
President Biden to unveil an infrastructure plan.
It's a once-in-a-generation investment in America, unlike anything we've seen or done.
Breaking news right now on Capitol Hill, where the Senate just passed the $1 trillion infrastructure bill this morning with strong bipartisan support.
After years and years of Infrastructure Week, we're on the cusp of an infrastructure decade that I truly believe will transform America.
Donald Trump never had an infrastructure plan any more than he had a health care plan, like I keep telling you. And by the way, I'm 100% correct every time I do tell you. Donald Trump just said whatever he perceived would make him look good at any given moment, and then dismissed it from his mind as there was never any intention of following through. Because when you're a cult leader, you don't have to follow through. your cult members will always make excuses for you and blame someone else, especially when their cult leader has his own massive media misinformation and propaganda machine and network that will lie for him and tell their audience Trump did follow through. And real quick, regarding Trump trying to weaponize the Justice Department and get the DOJ to give his stolen election lie credibility in order to aid his attempted coup, for those who say we shouldn't prosecute Trump because his coup didn't succeed, just keep in mind there's no such thing as a prosecution for a successful coup. And as we begin to record this show, it seems everything's going to shit in Afghanistan. And while I don't have enough time to prepare a lengthy segment on that, it would be journalistic malfeasance if I didn't say at least a few words on it. Firstly, were mistakes made by the Biden administration? Absolutely. Were there massive intelligence failures? Obviously, no question. That said, let me just say to all you newly minted armchair Afghanistan / foreign policy experts, just have a seat over there next to the armchair epidemiologists and virologists with whom you share the exact same amount of expertise, none. You haven't given a damn about Afghanistan for 20 years. You said nothing when the war criminal George W. Bush misappropriated money that had already been allocated for his Afghanistan war and sunk it into Iraq. That's when Afghanistan started to turn to shit. People like to talk about where the buck stops, and Joe Biden said that this afternoon, that it stopped with him. What people do not talk much about is where the buck starts. And this Afghanistan buck starts with war criminal George W. Bush. And just for the record, I am on record, on tape, on the radio, in audio archives, and one of the very few, I might add, who said we should not invade Afghanistan. And that was definitely the minority position after 9/11, when the general consensus among Americans was, we have to start killing people. I disagreed and was called a Taliban sympathizer and other stupid things by equally stupid people. And some of you, or your ilk, called me on my radio show, and their choice was to nuke Afghanistan, the whole country. They were really concerned with the innocent Afghan people back then, weren't they? But for Trump supporters who are blindly and mindlessly following what is still Donald Trump's state-run propaganda ministry and attacking Joe Biden and trying to blame everything on him, you praised Donald Trump when he invited the Taliban, terrorists, to Camp David and on the anniversary of 9/11. You applauded him when he said he was going to withdraw the troops by May of this year. We've since learned that after he lost the election, he wanted to get them all out by the end of last year, which would have been much more precipitous than his May 1st deadline. But why do you think he put the withdrawal date after the election? He thought he was going to win. Because he was warned what a shitstorm would likely ensue, and he didn't want that shitstorm to affect his re-election chances. And it didn't. He did. Oh, and did you hear? On Sunday, when things really started going south, the RNC removed the page from their website in which they praised Donald Trump for his decision to withdraw our troops and on the deal he made with the Taliban, a deal UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace called, quote, rotten and one for which the international community would have to pay the consequences, end quote. Team Trump also wishes they could scrub this from their base's memories.
We had a very good conversation with the leader of the Taliban today, and they're looking to get this ended, and we're looking to get it ended. I think we all have a very common interest. The relationship is very good that I have with the mullah. We're dealing very well with the Taliban. They're very tough, they're very smart, and even they are tired of fighting, in all fairness.
I started the process. All the troops are coming back home. They couldn't stop the process. 21 years is enough, don't we think? 21 years. They couldn't stop the process. They wanted to, but it was very tough to stop the process.
First, that last thing you heard was from June 26 of this year, less than 2 months ago. Second, and of course, it goes without saying, he was lying. Legitimate President Biden did not want to stop the process, nor did he. But ever the insufferable narcissist, desperate for approval and adoration, Trump was bragging and wanted credit for starting the process to end the war in Afghanistan. And the rest of what you heard, in case you didn't get it, was Trump essentially telling you he was turning Afghanistan over to the Taliban. Because due to the power of his magnetic personality, the Taliban suddenly wanted peace and democracy. But because Trump's media isn't paid to play clips like that, they, along with Trump's congressional whores, and of course, their mindless base that repeats whatever the aforementioned says, the collective right immediately started crapping all over Joe Biden for actually doing what Donald Trump said he was going to do. And it is both ironic and infuriating how these instantaneous Afghanistan experts can ignore the fact this Afghanistan nightmare has gone on for 20 years. And now they're blaming the guy who's taking us out of it for everything that's gone wrong in the past 20 years. Biden's only been in office 7 months. Biden was the one and only guy who had the guts and courage to take the hit and pull the plug when 3 other presidents wouldn't. George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and of course, Donald friggin' Trump. Trump talked, but as usual, did nothing. And what he did do was conveniently structured to benefit him and his reelection bid and no one and nothing else. Never forget that. Here's what Biden said this afternoon.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risks. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I would be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves. I'm now the 4th American president to preside over war in Afghanistan. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. I will not pass this responsibility on to a 5th president. I will not mislead the American people by claiming that just a little more time in Afghanistan will make all the difference. Nor will I shrink from my share of responsibility for where we are today and how we must move forward from here. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me. I'm deeply saddened by the facts we now face, but I do not regret my decision to end America's war fighting in Afghanistan and maintain a laser focus on our counterterrorism missions there and other parts of the world.
What I find interesting is that the overwhelming majority of Americans support us ending the war in Afghanistan and have for years. And yet, Joe Biden has taken heat from all sides, A, for doing what the American people want, B, for doing what he said he would do, C, for doing what Trump said he was going to do, and D, doing what 3 other presidents wouldn't. Be honest with the American people. You Trumpers said nothing when Trump released 5,000 Taliban prisoners for a 3-month ceasefire to prop up his failing re-election campaign. Those 5,000 prisoners now help control Afghanistan. And one of those prisoners was Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar. Trump had him released from prison in 2018. In 2020, Trump's then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar. And now, in 2021, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar is now the interim president of the Taliban government in Afghanistan. So again, all you instant Afghanistan/foreign policy experts, sit down, sit this one out, and shut the F up. Seriously, we real-world dwellers have grown tired of your phony outrage. You care not one continental damn about what's going on in Afghanistan right now, nor do you care about the Afghan people. You didn't care about children and babies being separated from their parents and thrown in cages. You didn't care about Americans dying in Puerto Rico while your orange disgrace threw paper towels. You cheered Trump's Muslim ban. You didn't and still don't care about COVID ravaging our country because of the piss-poor example Trump set by not wearing a mask and encouraging Americans to do the same. But now you're going to pretend you care about the Afghan people? Bitch, please! And that you're enraged over the Taliban entering the presidential palace when you think domestic terrorists, aka the American Taliban entering and desecrating our capital, is patriotic? But now you care about government takeovers? You don't. You don't care even a little, and you make me sick to my friggin' stomach. The people of Afghanistan have just become your latest Benghazi, whom you are now using as partisan political footballs, which you will now kick up and down the political football field in order to try and score political points against Joe Biden and Democrats. And shame on you, not just for your shameless exploitation, but for your abject and profound stupidity that prevents you from seeing what colossal hypocrites you are. Because if Biden had kept our troops in Afghanistan and rolled back the Trump plan, you same armchair experts would be excoriating Biden for keeping our troops in harm's way in an unwinnable war. And of course, what is still Donald Trump's state-run propaganda ministry had to exploit the unfolding Afghanistan tragedy to attack Joe Biden and his administration. That is, after all, what they're paid to do. And so far today, from what I've heard, they have been repeating Biden's comment that the Taliban was not likely to take over the country. And yet, not once have I heard them repeat Mike Pompeo's remarks from just 1 month ago on July 16th, when he addressed the Family Leadership Summit in Des Moines, Iowa. This is what he said, quote, "We gave them 20 years, $30 billion a year of our assistance. We gave them all the training they could handle. It's time for them to step forward and actually deliver on security for themselves. I am confident that they can do that," end quote. But how many times did Fox or the whores on right-wing hate radio recite that quote? I didn't hear it once. Why? Because if they did, their brain-dead audience wouldn't be able to crap all over Joe Biden for saying the exact same thing. It's not rocket science level manipulation. It's just lying by omission to achieve a political objective. Hate all Democrats, and in particular, the Biden administration. And regarding all this feigned concern for the Afghan people, if Joe Biden had said he was bringing 150,000 Afghans to America, you would accuse him of importing Muslims to vote illegally in the next election. And in fact, that Mother Tucker Carlson couldn't wait to start the refugee hating.
The people who made the Afghan occupation possible would like to see a lot more of our southern border, much more unrestrained immigration to the U.S. Bring in the refugees, they're screaming tonight. That's the only lesson they're taking from this debacle. Quote, America must not stand idly by, Mitt Romney tweeted today. The president must urgently rush to defend, rescue, and give and expand asylum. There is no time to spare. There's lots of time to spare as Americans die of fentanyl ODs and millions of foreign nationals whose identities we can't confirm move here. But when it comes to bringing Afghans to our country, there's no time to spare. And Liz Cheney firmly agrees with that. So does her friend Bill Kristol and Nancy Pelosi and Victoria Nuland at the State Department and so many more just like them. These are the architects of the disaster we are watching unfold on television. They should be groveling for our forgiveness, but they're not. Why? Because contrition requires decency. There's no chance. So we're getting it. And if history is any guide, and it's always a guide, we will see many refugees from Afghanistan resettle in our country in coming months, probably in your neighborhood. And over the next decade, that number may swell to the millions. So first we invade, and then we're invaded. It is always the same. We'll be spending a lot more time on that subject in coming weeks because it matters.
Oh, I have no doubt you'll be spending a lot more time on that, but not because it matters, but because it works. You have brainwashed your white supremacist audience to respond to any talk of refugees with the kind of hatred you taught them they just can't live without, which is why they watch you in the first place. And when one of you Trumpers can tear yourselves away from your hatred for just a moment, please tell me how this refugee hatred squares with your claim to be a Christian. It doesn't, but I'd love to hear your feeble and dishonest rationale. And just for the record, when you have spent 5 years defending Donald Trump, you have willingly sacrificed the right to accuse anyone of lacking decency. And then there was Charlie Kirk. And interestingly, I already had a bit prepared on him before the Afghanistan situation blew up. And I'll tell you more about him when we get to that bit. For now, this is what he said about Afghanistan.
President Joe Biden's Department of Defense will accept 30,000 Afghan refugees into military installations following the collapse of Kabul. Boom. Political transformation. Let the country crumble. Do you know there's 5 million displaced people in Afghanistan now? This was all intentional. Joe Biden let it fall apart to now say, oh, I'm so sorry. I guarantee you Joe Biden's speech this afternoon will talk about refugee assistance and relocation support. Now, Joe Biden's going to be scrambling to make good on it, and the liberal media will love it. They'll say, oh, yes, okay, now I get it. Joe Biden is now fixing his own problem. Joe Biden is stepping up, and he's allowing a flow of people from the Middle East into America. Thank you, Joe Biden. You're such a hero. You're so benevolent. You're so respectful. You're so compassionate. Do you see what's going on here? What's going on here is Joe Biden wants a couple 100,000 more Ilhan Omars to come into America to change the body politic permanently. We're playing checkers, and they're playing chess.
And you know, I gotta ask, does this obvious bullcrap actually work on you Trumpers? Seriously, you actually give blatant and transparent garbage like this credence? Astonishing. But, as the old saying goes, that escalated quickly. I mean, Trump's media went from Joe Biden isn't helping the people of Afghanistan to don't bring them over here, I would say, in record time. Again, explain that brand of Christianity to me, will you? And when I look at all the money that was wasted in Afghanistan, money, by the way, the right told us we couldn't afford to spend here at home, I cannot help but wonder what so much better uses that money could have been used for here in America. And of course, the unserious trolls in today's QOP had to offer their 2 cents worth. And trust me, it wasn't worth even that. This is what blunderbuss Lauren Boebert tweeted, quote, "The Taliban are the only people building back better," end quote. Well, firstly, that's a bald-faced lie. The Taliban is more known for destroying things than they are for building them. Secondly, do you realize what this Trump-supporting harpy fishwife and skank is doing? And she's not the only one. Today's pro-COVID QOP has now also become today's pro-Taliban QOP. Again, they are not serious politicians, nor does their base expect or even want them to be. All they care about is if they troll liberals. And if it means being pro-COVID and pro-Taliban in order to do so, no problem at all. Just shameful. And here's something I don't understand. I have seen many reports thus far today of Afghans blaming America and saying they feel betrayed by us. And while I understand that to a certain extent, what I don't understand is why aren't they blaming their military? Why aren't they, or didn't they, confront these troops and tell them, hey, America spent 20 years and billions of dollars equipping and training you. And the first time countless hundreds of thousands of you have to stand up to 50,000 or so mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging Neanderthals who ride around in the back of a pickup truck, you fold like a cardboard box in a rainstorm and give them the sophisticated weapons America gave you? WTF, man. Be a man. Be men. Fight for us. Fight for your country. And who knows, maybe they did, and that just hasn't been reported yet. As I say, it's still relatively early in this debacle as we record this show. But I did want to address it, at least from what we know thus far. And who knows, maybe they did blast their military. And who knows for sure why their military folded. Perhaps they're cowards? Maybe they didn't want to fight for the government we forced upon them. I'm sure more will be revealed in the days to come. Perhaps deep down, and because of who and what they are and have been for eons, the majority of the men in the military agree with the Taliban. Might that be a possibility? And if that's true, that's something we refuse to understand. There are different cultures and different mindsets, and not all of those cultures and mindsets are American ones. And in all honesty, America's present culture and mindset isn't America either. While we have been sacrificing lives and treasure to turn Afghanistan into an American-style democracy, there are forces here at home among what became Donald Trump's QOP that have been fighting to cripple and frankly kill our American democracy. And all because of their devotion to the one authoritarian dictator wannabe who is the least worthy of their loyalty and adoration and dedication. And we've just learned, courtesy of the Washington Post, that this collapse of the Afghan military, the reason it happened so quickly was because it didn't happen quickly. In fact, it began in early 2020. And before we get to the headline, let me just tell you Trumpers that the deal Trump worked out with the Taliban was called the Doha Agreement, which, by the way, contained not one word about human rights, in particular, women's rights. Here's the headline, quote, Afghanistan's military collapse, illicit deals, and mass desertions, end quote. And here's the lead to the story, quote, the spectacular collapse of Afghanistan's military that allowed Taliban fighters to walk into the Afghan capital Sunday despite 20 years of training and billions of dollars in American aid began with a series of deals brokered in rural villages between the militant group and some of the Afghan government's lowest-ranking officials. The deals, initially offered early last year, were often described by Afghan officials as ceasefires, but Taliban leaders were in fact offering money in exchange for government forces to hand over their weapons. Over the next year and a half, the meetings advanced to the district level and then rapidly on to provincial capitals, culminating in a breathtaking series of negotiated surrenders by government forces. Within a little more than a week, Taliban fighters overran more than a dozen provincial capitals and entered Kabul with no resistance, triggering the departure of Afghanistan's president and the collapse of his government. Afghan security forces in the districts ringing Kabul and in the city itself simply melted away. By nightfall, police checkpoints were left abandoned and the militants roamed the streets freely. End quote. And here are the payoff paragraphs. Quote, the Taliban capitalized on the uncertainty caused by the February 2020 agreement reached in Doha, Qatar, between the militant group and the United States, calling for a full American withdrawal from Afghanistan. Some Afghan forces realized they would soon no longer be able to count on American air power and other crucial battlefield support and grew receptive to the Taliban's approaches. The Doha Agreement, designed to bring an end to the war in Afghanistan, instead left many Afghan forces demoralized, bringing into stark relief the corrupt impulses of many Afghan officials and their tenuous loyalty to the country's central government. Some police officers complained that they had not been paid in 6 months or more. They saw that document as the end, the officer said, referring to the majority of Afghans aligned with the government. The day the deal was signed, we saw the change. Everyone was just looking out for himself. It was like the United States left us to fail. The negotiated surrenders to the Taliban slowly gained pace in the months following the Doha deal, according to a U.S. official and an Afghan officer. Then, after President Biden announced in April that U.S. forces would withdraw from Afghanistan this summer without conditions, the capitulations began to snowball. When an Afghan police officer was asked about his force's apparent lack of motivation, he explained that they hadn't been getting their salaries. Several Afghan police officers on the front lines in Kandahar before the city fell said they hadn't been paid in 6 to 9 months. Taliban payoffs became even more enticing. End quote. And these are an enraging couple of paragraphs. Quote, unwilling to surrender or fight outmatched, the members of the unit put down their weapons, changed into civilian clothing, and fled their post. I feel ashamed of what I've done, said the first officer, but he said if he hadn't fled, I would have been sold to the Taliban by my own government. End quote. So I take back my coward suggestion. It seems the Afghan military was sold out by their own government. You know, kind of like our troops in Afghanistan were sold out by our government, as in Iraq and Korea and Vietnam. But we didn't know any of this was happening in Afghanistan. That beggars credulity. But here's the bottom line, at least as I see it. We have given the Afghanistan military 20 years to fight the Taliban. Now it is time for us to focus on the American Taliban, aka the quote-unquote religious right militias for Jesus and Trump. You know, the ones who want the same type of government here in America the Taliban wants in Afghanistan, just a different holy book. Bottom line, if you still support a craven, shameless serial liar who tried to extort a foreign ally, weaponize our Justice Department, and then incited an insurrection, all to help him murder our democracy in cold blood by overturning a free and fair election, the foundational pillar of our democracy, you have willingly sacrificed the right to argue policy on Afghanistan, or, if I may be so bold, accurate, and honest, anything else for that matter. And that goes double for Donald Trump. As for his remarks where he's pretending he's a credible and authoritative critic of Biden's Afghanistan policy, which is Trump's policy, I'm not going to waste any time reading his statements, which, by the way, are crafted to make it look like he's still the president. But if there's anyone watching this show right now who actually believes this would have gone down better if Trump had succeeded in stealing this election, I'm sorry. I simply refuse to waste time on stupidity that profound. Turn on Fox. They'll not only tell you what Trump said, they'll make it sound like it matters and makes sense. It doesn't. And Trump is so stupid, he thinks that if Biden resigns, which he called for last night, he'll get to be president again, which will allow him to hammer the final nail into our democracy's coffin. And read the last line in that statement, quote, "It shouldn't be a big deal because he wasn't elected legitimately in the first place," end quote. There is nothing this shameless Trump liar and loser will not exploit in order to further divide this nation and incite the next violent insurrection. By now, he knows of this Homeland Security alert. Quote, "Through the remainder of 2021, racially or ethically motivated violent extremists and anti-government/anti-authority violent extremists will remain a national threat priority for the United States." And what did they specifically point out? Those who would cause violence based on, quote, "conspiracy theories on perceived election fraud and alleged reinstatement, and responses to anticipated restrictions relating to the increasing COVID cases," end quote. In short, Trump's American Taliban base. Last show, which ended up being a 2-hour tour de force on the first January 6 hearing, I only mentioned two things briefly in passing before we got to the hearing: Andrew Cuomo and Mike Lindell, who had pronounced that Trump would be reinstated this month. I have two follow-ups to both those subjects. First, Andrew Cuomo, and this tweet comes from lifelong conservative Republican and former Congressman Joe Walsh. And this speaks to all the times you've heard me call Donald Trump's brain-dead base a cult. Walsh tweeted, quote, "A friend who is a political independent just asked me, okay, the Democrats finally held Cuomo accountable. Why don't Republicans ever hold Trump accountable?" End quote. To which Walsh responded, quote, "Because the Republican Party is a cult, and in a cult, the cult leader can get away with anything," end quote. True that. And I would just add, when you are part of a cult, it is difficult indeed to let go. Secondly, Mike Lindell. Moonbat Mike held what he called his cyber symposium this week in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, what I would call his shambolic election-denying shit show. And I'm not the only one who called it that. Check this headline from the Daily Beast. Lindell offered nothing new, just the same tired, old, stale, and long debunked conspiracy theories and lies. And those in attendance seemed to agree. One called it a nothing burger.
How you guys doing? So I wanted to give you a quick update from yesterday at the Cyber Symposium up here in Sioux Falls. So a lot of information, not a whole lot of evidence. I think that's what I have the takeaway. So other than that, I mean, to me, it's kind of a nothing burger, but, I'm looking forward to some evidence today, and I think that hopefully we'll get through that.
Another genuine cyber expert, Robert Graham, who was invited to the shit show by Lindell, tweeted this, quote, "To be clear, he gave us experts nothing today but random garbage that wastes our time," end quote. And the first day of the Simpletonposium, the room had a decent number of attendees. However, day two looked pretty sparse to me. Damn, that looks like a midnight bingo session in a town with a total population of 47. CNN's Donny O'Sullivan went to the shit show symposium accompanied by world-renowned cyber expert and election specialist Harry Hurst. Here's an exchange they had.
We expected a huge pile of data which we wouldn't be able to understand and how it can be evidence. We didn't expect there's no pile of anything.
There's not even a pile of bullshit here. There's just a pile of nothing.
There's only pile of nothing.
No evidence of election fraud here, but plenty of promotions for pillows and other products.
Got bathrobes, slippers, pajamas, bath mats. So go look at what you like. There's so much cute stuff.
And I thought this was the best line from the entire joke of a get-together. Not only because it was funny, but because it was just so perfectly emblematic of Trumpism. Watch this.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a computer guy. I don't know what most of this stuff means, but I've been researching this election since November 3rd, and I can tell you right now that everything we're seeing right here, we saw in Antrim County. It was absolutely censored by the media. Most people don't know that this isn't anything new. We need to wake up as people, and you, the cameras in the back there, not all of you, but the CNNs of the world, you guys need to start reporting this and stop fact-checking it.
You can't make this stuff up, folks. You folks in the media need to start reporting this horse shit and stop fact-checking those damn pesky facts. And at the end of the day, this is what it all boiled down to. Josh Merritt, the guy Lindell hired to be his lead cyber expert, said it was all a complete bust. And this is a story in the Washington Times, not the Washington Post, the Washington Times, a reliably pro-Trump, pro-stolen election paper. Look at the headline, quote, "Exclusive, cyber expert says his team can't prove Lindell's claims that China hacked the election," end quote. And if we scroll down a bit to below Lindell's photo, you can see that this is indeed from the Washington Times, and the lead to the story reads, quote, "The cyber expert on the red team hired by MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell now says the data underpinning the theory that China hacked the 2020 election unveiled at the Cyber Symposium is, wait for it, illegitimate. Illegitimate," end quote. Also from the story, quote, "So, our team said we're not going to say that this is legitimate if we don't have confidence in the information," Mr. Merritt said on Wednesday, the second day of the symposium, end quote. And check the exact wording the Washington Times used next, quote, "Mr. Merritt's break from Mr. Lindell accelerated the unraveling of the MyPillow millionaire's months of spinning of a conspiracy theory that he said would reverse the outcome of the 2020 election and restore former President Donald Trump to the White House," end quote. Even the Washington Times is calling this whole charade a conspiracy theory. That's telling, and it should be for all you Trump supporters. It won't be, but it should be. And no, the Washington Times hasn't become part of the mythical deep state. And no, they're not Trump haters. At least in this one instance, they're reporting real-world news, likely because they have seen the lawsuits filed against some who have helped perpetuate Trump's big stolen election lie. Back to the story. Did I mention in the Washington Times? Quote, "Mr. Lindell delayed a scheduled unveiling of the evidence on Wednesday at the symposium. He had offered $5 million to any in-person attendee who could disprove his claims. The offer is no longer on the table," Mr. Merritt said. The original source of the data, Dennis L. Montgomery, had supposedly suffered a stroke as the symposium began and was not in attendance nor made available for contact throughout the first 2 days of the event. Montgomery initially came forward with the supposed packet captures after he spun a conspiracy theory that tools used by the CIA were being used to influence U.S. elections. Both Merritt and Krieb, both of whom have pushed claims of voter fraud, agreed that the data Montgomery sent didn't contain any packet captures and are useless in proving Lindell's conspiracy that China changed millions of votes. End quote. Now, maybe it's just me, but that seems like a rather convenient stroke, wouldn't you say? And if that name Dennis Montgomery sounds familiar at all, he has quite the resume. Look at this headline, quote, "The man who conned the Pentagon," end quote. From the story, quote, "That may explain how a man named Dennis Montgomery convinced the CIA that Al Jazeera was sending coded messages through its broadcast signal to Al Qaeda operatives," end quote. And then there's this headline, quote, "How a Reno casino con man duped the CIA and pulled one of the most dangerous hoaxes in American history." A bit from that story, quote, "Dennis Montgomery, a little-known government contractor who claimed he had the ability to decode secret al-Qaeda messages embedded in Al Jazeera broadcasts," end quote. And there's more. Listen to this tidbit regarding Lindell's chief cyber expert, Josh Merritt, and this is back to the story in the Washington Times. Quote, "Before becoming Lindell's lead cyber expert, Merritt had been pro-Trump lawyer Sidney Powell's secret military intelligence expert in her Kraken lawsuits, alleging foreign actors had used Dominion voting machines to steal votes from Trump. Merritt, known as Spider in Powell's court filings, is an information technology consultant and an Army veteran. However, he never completed even an entry-level training course for military intelligence and was not an intelligence analyst. All of the Powell cases he offered expert testimony to were tossed out of court," end quote. Just another example of the inevitable consequences when the American people elect a con man to be their so-called president. Of course, he surrounds himself with fellow con men like Mike Lindell, who of course surround themselves with fellow con men like Dennis Montgomery and Josh Merritt. I mean, I don't know how many times I'm going to have to say this before it starts penetrating you Trumpers' thick yet empty skulls. Everything concerning Donald Trump is a con and, of course, a grift. Everything is about duping the rubes and suckers who support them and fleecing them for every penny they can, period. Just like this email I received just this morning from Team Trump. And this speaks to something I wondered about when Trump said he was going to restart his clandemic rallies. I wondered at the time how long this would last now that he had to pay for them himself. Turns out he's now asking his brain-dead base to pay for his clandemic rallies. Here's the email, quote, "Your favorite president needs your help. While big tech companies, the fake news media, and the Democrats work to silence President Trump, he's busy traveling around the nation to meet with as many patriots as he can. President Trump is starting up his big league Trump rallies, but he needs your help to keep them going. Of course, he's calling on you to step up to make sure he has enough resources to continue meeting with the American people," end quote. Again, it is always about the grift and fleecing money from the rubes, dupes, and suckers in his brain-dead base. And as always, it'll work. They will send this grifter and liar money. But back to the Lindell Shit Show Symposium. This led to a column by the Washington Post's Philip Bump, which he appropriately titled, quote, "The Con is Winding Down," end quote. And Philip made a great point in his column, quote, "Imagine that someone handed you an envelope containing a lengthy document written in Portuguese. You have it translated, and you learn that it's a written confession from a criminal who is currently siphoning billions of dollars a day from millions of individual checking accounts. What do you do next? Presumably, you call the local police or the FBI. You present them with the original document and the translation and let them take it from there. What you presumably do not do is promise for weeks on end that you have definitive proof that someone is stealing millions of dollars from bank accounts and that people need to fly to some remote location so that you can unveil that proof over the course of 3 days. End quote. Yeah, and then still not produce any evidence. Great point by the Washington Post's Philip Bump. If there was one highlight from this shit show symposium, it was when Lindell introduced a brand new product from his MyPillow line. This one is called My Straight Jacket, and it looks quite nice. It says it has all the comfort you would expect from a MyPillow product, and it's like a fashionable puffer jacket plus the protection of a padded cell. And I'm sure Mike will be just thrilled wearing his. And speaking of which, Donald Trump was not reinstated on Friday, August the 13th, as Lindell had promised. I'm telling you, Joe Biden has won this election so many times, he's now the 76th president of the United States. For real. What is both amazing and not is that it is so painfully obvious that Mike Lindell is simply unwell. It appears more and more he's been more of a mark than a fraudster and has been taken in by fraudsters, only too willing to take his money and tell him what he wanted to hear. What's confounding is why anyone would go to these lengths on behalf of Donald Trump, the most incompetent, dishonest, and traitorous so-called president we've ever had. A guy who continues to rip off those who support him the most fervently for asking for donations for certain causes and then not using them for those causes. Example, check this headline in the Washington Post dated August 3rd. Quote, Trump's PAC collected $75 million this year, but so far the group has not put money into pushing for the 2020 ballot reviews he touts. End quote. A bit from the story. Quote, former President Donald Trump's political PAC raised about $75 million in the first half of this year as he trumpeted the false notion that the 2020 election was stolen from him. But the group has not devoted funds to help finance the ongoing ballot review in Arizona or to push for similar endeavors in other states. Instead, the Save America Leadership PAC, which has few limits on how it can spend its money, has paid for some of the former president's travel, legal costs, and staff, along with other expenses. Even as he assiduously tracks attempts by his allies to cast doubt on the integrity of last year's election, Trump has been uninterested in personally bankrolling the efforts, relying on other entities and supporters to fund the endeavors. End quote. Again, it's all a con, and it's always about the grift. So if you're going to elevate someone to the position of supreme dear leader and support his clumsy criminal efforts to steal an election he clearly lost, do it on behalf of someone with even a modicum of decency, integrity, and honor. Trump has none of these. Which leads us to the question so many people have asked for years now. How can people support a guy so bereft of anything good? Why don't Trump supporters care that he's a garbage human being? And the answer is simple. Trump's base doesn't care if Trump possesses those qualities because they don't. They don't care that he's a pathological liar. These people patronize sources for news and information they know lie to them. Look at how comfortable they are repeating Trump's big stolen election lie and what they're willing to do on its and his behalf. from the January 6th insurrection to the voter restriction laws. It all just comes natural to them. And I would bet the farm most, if not all of them, know it's a lie. They just don't care, as they are liars themselves. And as long as Trump continues to play the eternal victim and acts like he hates the same people his base does and blames them for all his perceived grievances, which allows his base to do the same thing, as long as he never takes any responsibility for anything and proudly, which again allows his base to follow suit, they will never leave him. Why? Because they are him. Even more confounding, and not, is how so many of our fellow Americans could look at a man as obviously unwell as Mike Lindell is and give anything he says credence. Are they as unwell as he is? No, that can't be true. And while many of us may be tempted to laugh at Lindell's obvious instability because of the equal instability of those who do give him credence, he is a dangerous man, albeit perhaps a clueless, unwitting one. And the reason this is not confounding is because they did the same thing with Trump for 4 years. Donald Trump is even more unwell than Mike Lindell. Lindell appears to be just a hapless and gullible sap who I'm willing to bet might not even be aware that he's been taken in by fraudsters and may not be aware he's lying. Trump, on the other hand, is a dangerous sociopath and dictator wannabe who knows he's lying but just doesn't care. But again, that doesn't make Lindell any less dangerous. Which brings me to this bit of commentary by MSNBC host Mehdi Hasan that I thought provided nutritious food for thought.
Now, we can laugh at this craziness, but it's dangerous craziness. Think about what a deeply perilous moment for our democracy when a man who sells pillows on cable television has convinced tens of millions of Americans that a safe, secure democratic election was stolen. So here we are, Friday the 13th. Biden's still president, and the only significance today has for pillow man Mike Lindell is good old-fashioned Friday the 13th bad luck. But as with all good cults, expect the goalposts to shift fast. Expect one missed deadline from a false conspiracy to just bleed into another, because a significant chunk of the American public has collectively lost its mind. And the blame lies squarely with the big lies perpetrated by a coalition of authoritarians, white supremacists, and yes, attention-seeking grifters and con men. History will record that in America, in 2021, the fascists did not come wearing jackboots. They came selling pillows and online furniture.
And that furniture reference was to Patrick Byrne, former CEO of Overstock.com, until he had to resign after he had an affair with Russian spy Maria Butina. Remember her? Byrne wrote a book and produced a documentary, crockumentary would be more accurate, on the big stolen election lie. He also contributed millions of dollars to what even Republicans have called the ridiculous fraudit in Arizona. You know, the one that was looking for watermarks and bamboo in the ballots. The depths to which Donald Trump has shamed and disgraced and betrayed this nation are incalculable. And yet, he wouldn't be able to do it on his own without millions of Trumpers being stupid enough to support him and believe him. He'd just be another senile old man yelling at clouds and for kids to get off his lawn. And now that the Olympics are over, I thought we'd take a look at one particular comment from one of the younger MAGA charlatans. And just for the record, here's our final tally. We had the most gold medals, 39. China had 38. We had the most silver medals, 41. China had 32. And we had the most bronze medals, 33. China had 18. And yet, there were some right-wing pundits who had to attack our American athletes, in particular, one, Simone Biles, for her decision to withdraw from all-round competition. And my right-wing example for today, Charlie Kirk, whose unparalleled wisdom we heard from earlier concerning Afghanistan. Kirk is the founder of Turning Point USA and Students for Trump, which he defines as an endeavor to recruit young people to conservative causes. That sounds so much better than Charlie Kirk's grift to fleece money from the younger rubes and dupes and suckers in this country.
We are raising a generation of weak people like Simone Biles. Again, if you want to be, if she got all these mental health problems, don't show up. She's an incredible athlete. Of course she's an incredible athlete. I'm not saying, I just said she's probably the greatest gymnast of all time. She's also very selfish, she's immature, and she is a shame to the country. She's totally a sociopath.
So much to unpack there. Weak? Arguably the most skilled gymnast of all time? Weak? You know, I made the case a couple shows ago that yes, sometimes you can judge a book just by looking at the cover. Looking at Charlie Kirk, does this look like someone who should be criticizing athletes? And selfish. Selfish? That's all you can derive from this decision? Selfishness? Does Kirk not have any idea what can happen if something goes wrong in one of these routines?
Such an impressive young lady.
Let's see how high she flies right here.
Yep. Ooh.
This is the event back in 2012 in which he was injured and caused him to have to withdraw from the 2012 Olympic Games. Oh, just like that.
And that was, okay.
Goodness sake.
Please, everybody turn away.
Selfish? Selfish? You arrogant, sociopathic, white privileged little prick. A young lady with the weight of the world on her shoulders who realized she just didn't have it that day and didn't want to risk killing herself just to please assholes like Charlie friggin' Kirk. And the only adjective he can come up with is selfish? How about human, Charlie? Something to which you evidently have little personal attachment. And then, for him to have the balls, the audacity to call Simone Biles a sociopath? I'm sorry, when you have defended Donald Trump for 5 years, you have willingly sacrificed the right to call anybody else a sociopath, or a liar, or a thief, or a narcissist, or an authoritarian dictator wannabe, etc., etc. Although, in all fairness, I have always said Donald Trump is more of a psychopath than sociopath. Sociopaths are capable of sometimes expressing empathy and remorse. Psychopaths, like Donald Trump, never. Just not in their DNA. But the bottom line, Charlie Kirk is a 27-year-old punk and a snot-nosed, wet-behind-the-ears Trump humper who grifts money from people who will attend stupid rallies like the one he did recently with the orange turd called Turning Point Action Election Integrity Rally, which affords Kirk the opportunity to spit out red meat bullshit like this.
Now, there's something that's been really bothering me in the last couple weeks. And I don't care about what your opinion of this certain thing is, but we can all agree on this. We can all agree that no one should be forced to take a vaccine against
All I can tell you is this. Charlie Kirk and every other right-wing nut who is now attacking Simone Biles, not one of them is as good at his or her job as Simone is at hers. But as the old saying goes, haters gotta hate. And here's another element this Charlie Kirk and the right don't understand. Simone Biles is the star of the U.S. gymnastics team. She withdrew knowing she didn't have it. And she did that for her team. She cared more for her team than her own image. You and your congressional whores and bootlickers should emulate Simone Biles. You are supporting a guy who only cares for himself and his team be damned. All because you want to be reelected, and shame on you. And speaking of judging books by their cover, here's another one. Seriously, what more do you think you need to know about this gal to form an opinion as to what she's like, huh? And it's not, but doesn't the guy beside her look suspiciously a bit like Matt Jailbait Gates? Again, it isn't. It is painfully obvious this woman is over 17. And you know, not only did this harpy fishwife and skank want Trump to win last year, I bet you she's one of those numbnuts who thinks he actually did. Couple other Olympic-related items. First, this tweet and its response, quote, "How the F didn't the USA win the gold medal for shooting?" End quote. To which someone responded, quote, "The event wasn't held in a high school." End quote. And then there were the right-wing traitors in this country, led by the orange traitor himself, Donald Trump. This is what Trump said in a statement, quote, "If our soccer team led by a radical group of leftist maniacs wasn't woke, they would have won the gold medal instead of the bronze. Woke means you lose. Everything that is woke goes bad, and our soccer team certainly has. There were, however, a few patriots standing. Unfortunately, they need more than that, respecting our country and national anthem. They should replace the wokesters with patriots and start winning again. The woman with the purple hair played terribly and spends too much time thinking about radical left politics and not doing her job." End quote. What complete and utter horseshit, mixed with just the right amount of red meat for his brain-dead base. And they, of course, swallow it whole, horseshit and all. Yummy? The amount of effort it takes to become an Olympic athlete in any sport, all to represent your country at the Olympics, that is the embodiment of patriotism. But if you don't bow down to your dear leader and you dare speak the unvarnished truth about him or America, or you use your platform to make a social justice statement, you're suddenly not a patriot, not a real American, just not white enough or Christian enough. As we learned a long time ago, there is no bottom with Donald Trump, and there are no depths to which he will not sink to become even more disgusting and repulsive. I mean, he even had to shit on our American Olympic athletes and further divide us on that, which he can only do if there are enough traitors who will agree with him. And sadly, there are millions of them. Donald Trump is still stewing from something Megan Rapinoe said, she's the one with the purple hair, back in 2019 when our American women's soccer team won the World Cup.
Are you excited about going to the White House?
I'm not going to the fucking White House. No, I'm not going to the White House. We're not going to be invited.
You're not going to be invited?
I doubt it.
Megan Rapinoe scored half of the goals in our 4-3 victory over Australia that won us a bronze medal. As for her purple hair, what's the big deal? This is how I looked when I first arrived in Las Vegas many years ago. Megan Rapinoe was asked about Trump's statement. Let's watch that exchange.
This team took a knee. We've seen Raven Saunders, take a stand, and the fencer and Bowden too. Why is it so important now for athletes to use this platform?
I mean, I think it's important for everybody to do whatever they can to make the world a better place. I think it's no secret there's a lot of inequalities all over the world in every aspect of life, and I personally think it's everybody's responsibility to make the world a better place. We obviously have huge platforms. We get to be at the Olympics or play in front of thousands of people, and so I think it's just kind of a wasted opportunity and kind of selfish, to be honest, to not use that platform and the influence that we have, knowing how much people look up to us and listen to what we say, to try to make the world a better place. So that's the way that we can do it and be most impactful.
Have you seen what the former president put out there? I just wonder if you have a response to that.
No, I don't have. I have seen it. I mean, it's a real sad, like, dig into an old bag, I guess. I'm just like, you're rooting for people to do bad? Yikes.
And here's something I don't fully understand. All these people refusing to go to the White House because they hate Trump, that's exactly why I would want to go, because it would bother Trump all to hell if someone like Megan Rapinoe did show up. Same with me. And I swear on my mother's grave, I would make the most of that trip. I would get at least one line in on exactly how I felt about him. In fact, I'd keep going until he either left like the fat coward he is, or the Secret Service dragged me away. No violence, that's not my jam. But words are my jam. Smile, an everlasting smile is what I'll have if you just leave. When will you ever just be gone? 'Cause that would bring no tears to me. The U.S. has lost its glory. Let's start a brand new story, mate. Right now, there is no better time, and I can show you how, my friends. Talk in everlasting words and dedicate them to democracy. And then we'll follow up our words with dedicated actions. And for those who think that we don't mean a single word we say, we'll show them that our words aren't all we have to send them all away. Our words and actions are all we really need to send them all away. And finally, how about this photograph from the Olympics? Isn't that amazing? Look at this. Although I'm almost certain there's a better way to blow up a balloon. And that's going to do it for today, folks. I thank you for watching. For those Trumpers who made it this far, congratulations. Give yourself a pat on the back. You are much smarter now than you were an hour or so ago. There may be hope for you yet. Again, my website, DougBasham.com, my email, Doug@DougBasham.com, and I'll tell you what, we will do this all over again in a week or so, hopefully with you. Until then, take care.